everyone. Spencer Reese here from militarymoneymanual.com. Today on the podcast, we're talking with Brian O'Neill from Wingman Wealth. Brian's been on the podcast a few times before, and today we had the opportunity to talk about the new Roth in-plan conversion opportunity in the thrift savings plan. It's a very tactical, numbers-packed episode, so you might want to slow down and do some Googling while you listen to it. Brian O'Neill's founded Wingman Wealth Management and Financial Planning in 1997. He had an idea that in order to get sound financial advice, pilots and the military community shouldn't have to use giant financial services companies that sell high-priced, high-commission, and often inappropriate financial products. Instead, they deserve sound, fiduciary, fee-only advice, and they should be able to choose how they get it. He served for 23 years in the U.S. Air Force, flew F-16s and F-35s in combat test and training, and helped hundreds of airmen, sailors, soldiers, Marines, and veterans understand how to max perform their incomes to produce the opportunity for wealth, secure retirement, realizing life goals, and financial peace of mind. He's raising 2 daughters, he married his best friend, and he loved having the opportunity to defend his nation. He's also a certified financial planner, CFP, and you can find him at wingmanwealth.com. He's also part of the Military Financial Advisors Association, MFAA. We have a great episode. I will warn you, it is pretty tax and numbers heavy in the first 20 to 30 minutes, and then it opens up a little bit more in the end. And we talk about who can take advantage of the Roth in-plan conversion opportunity and who it's most appropriate for. But I think it'll give you a good understanding of when you should be using this when your taxes are low, and when you should be thinking about maybe making some conversions so that you can leave your heirs a tax-free inheritance. It's a great episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Let us know, militarymoneymanual.com, or reach out on Instagram at militarymoneymanual. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Military Money Manual podcast. First episode, Jamie and I are recording in 2026. Very excited to have Brian O'Neill, who is a certified financial planner, on the podcast. And today we're talking about some pretty interesting thrift savings plan TSP news. The TSP has announced that they're going to be enabling Roth conversions starting this month, January 2026. And this is opening up some interesting opportunities for military service members, especially because our pay is often very low taxed, and we also get this little thing called CZTE, Combat Zone Tax Exclusion. A little tease about what we're going to be talking about. ALF, welcome back to the podcast. I think you might be second place for our most often guest. I think Kate Horrell still has you beat, but welcome back again.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here. Yeah, I don't know. Do you get like a cool jacket at a certain number of these, like Saturday Night Live, or?
Yeah, we need to start making patches for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess let's start with, if a listener's not familiar with the thrift savings plan, they can go back to listen to our most popular episode. That's episode number 2, where Jamie and I break down the TSP and everything that's involved in there. We have a whole bunch of other episodes about deep diving into the various funds available in the TSP. But let's say that the listener is familiar with the TSP and maybe they're generally familiar with the Roth versus traditional options. Let's start there. Why would a service member contribute to their Roth TSP? And what are the two options? Like, why is there a Roth and a traditional option in the TSP?
I think it simplifies to Roth is best if you think your tax rate is going to be higher when you access the money notionally in retirement. And traditional pre-tax is better when the opposite is true. If you think your tax bill is going to be higher today than it will be when you access the money in retirement. For most military members, especially those who are going to retire and get a pension and then work a follow-on job, it's very, very likely that your tax rate is going to be higher in retirement. And then if you move to a state that has state income tax, you'll potentially be paying that for the first time. And all the safe bet is that your tax rate will be higher in retirement than it is on active duty. And believe it or not, like that remains true all the way up to general officers. A single income general officer family is generally actually still in the 22% bracket. And yet when they retire, like they're going to have a pension somewhere 75% to 100% of their pre-tax basic pay. Their pre-retirement basic pay. And then they're going to have an okay follow-on job. So the reality is most of us should plan on a higher tax rate in retirement. And therefore, Roth is great when we're still on active duty.
Just to put some numbers around this, so for 2026, the 10% bracket is, I'm gonna round to the nearest thousand here just to keep it simple, but the 10% bracket is $25,000 or less. The 12% bracket, and this is for married filing jointly, married couples filing jointly. The 10% bracket, $25,000 or less. 12% bracket goes from 25 to 100,000. 22 goes from 100 to about 210,000, and then the 24% bracket goes from 200,000 to 400,000. And what people need to remember here too is this is on your taxable income, right? So you're going to, a lot of service members might look at their W-2 and say, wow, I made $100,000 in base pay, but you're not going to be taxed on all of that, right? If you're married filing jointly, you can take the standard deduction, which is increasing for 2026 to, I believe, 32,200. There it is. And then if you're single filer, you can cut that in half. So 16,100. ALF was saying there, it's pretty hard to get out of the 24% bracket as a single earning military family. The 24% bracket goes up to $403,000 in 2026. Even dual military. ALF, I don't know if you've ever seen a dual military couple making over $400,000 a year. I think that would be dual GOs, maybe officers or pilots, doctors. Again, that's pretty difficult. A lot of your military compensation is made up of these untaxed allowances, right? Basic allowance for housing, basic allowance for sustenance, and COLA, cost of living adjustment. And those just are simply not added to your taxable income. So for most military families, it would be very difficult to break out of a 24% bracket and really the 22% bracket, especially on the enlisted side.
A firm. Yeah, the only families I have that are above that, it's typically like an officer with a civilian spouse, and maybe that civilian spouse is even higher earning. I've got one family where the spouse is an ER doc. Yeah, they're comfortably over the 24% bracket. Yeah, or maybe uncomfortably over.
Good for them. So we were talking about before we hit record, kind of, rules of thumb for Roth versus traditional. And I know you're going to say, like all good financial advisors, well, it depends. But in general, kind of the way I've thought about it, at least I'll just talk personally in my own life, is if I'm in the, let's say, 22% bracket or lower, so my taxable income is going to be, let's say for 2026, is below $210,000. I'm thinking I'm going to be contributing to my Roth account. And in fact, when I was on active duty as an active duty service member, I got out as a 12-year 04. So my effective tax rates while I was on active duty, I went back and checked my 1040s that I had filed with the IRS. It was always single digits, my effective tax rate, which means that I was probably in 12% bracket for most of my military career. And this was as a pilot earning good money, and also my spouse worked as well. She didn't make quite as much as I did, but she did contribute income as well, and we never broke out the 12% bracket. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Combat zone deployments, and the fact that, like I said, so much of our compensation is from BAH, BAS, and these untaxed allowances. And then also the ability as a military service member to change your state of legal residency within, the bounds of the law. So like for myself, I was stationed in Texas for my first duty assignment, and I became a proud resident of the state of Texas for the entirety of my military career, never had to update that. And that's something that you still see a lot of military service members kind of forgetting, but it's not an option to you once you're in the civilian world, right? Like you have to be a resident of the place that you live when you get out into the civilian world. So I guess wrapping up the Spencer rant here, the point is that it's quite difficult for U.S. military couples to get into these higher tax brackets. It is possible. I mean, like you said, there's some examples of people who have, maybe they have civilian pilots or doctors as partners. And so as a married couple, they're pushing into those 24, 32% brackets. But it's difficult, and you don't often see it. And I think most military service members, if they actually sat down and looked at their previous year tax return, they would realize, or as they're filing taxes this year in 2026 for the 2025 tax year, they would realize that I didn't break out of the 12% bracket. And perhaps especially on the junior officer, junior enlisted side, they're probably not breaking out the 10% bracket.
It's a shack. I mean, you're going to have the lowest tax rates you're probably ever going to have. And if not, then frankly, whether or not you have Roth money or traditional money may not be even remotely relevant in your world. Just having you're probably more worried about food on the table at that point.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked, so that's, like you said, it's the breakdown comes to between, do I think my tax rate is going to be higher in retirement or lower in retirement? And it's hard, especially if you're going to earn a military pension and you might work a civilian job as well. It's hard to kind of see a future in which future tax rates on your income, no matter what they're doing kind of in, the world, it would be unusual if your tax rates in the future are lower than they currently are while you're in the military. So that would drive most military service members who think that they are in a lower tax bracket, maybe the 10, 12, 22% bracket, to favor a Roth contribution. But let's say that you have, a dual military couple and they're pushing into the 24% bracket and they're thinking, you know what, 24% on my marginal dollar, that's a quarter, right? For every dollar I earn, I can give Uncle Sam a quarter today, or I can skip that by contributing to the traditional account. And then hopefully when I'm in retirement, I'm paying a lower tax rate. So that's kind of the mindset shift as your income goes up is you might say, okay, I'm going to skip paying that dollar today, or excuse me, that quarter today on the dollar I earn. And then in retirement, hopefully my tax rate is lower and I pay a little bit less. And so that's the delta there, right? So if you can get down, let's say you get down to the 12% bracket in retirement and you were in the 24% bracket, then you have a 12% tax delta there. Is that about right?
Yeah. And I think another way to think about this too, and I see a lot of families that when they try to think about like my tax rate now, and then I got like 30 or 40 years or 20 years, whatever number till retirement. And then of course, retirement is not a unitary event. It's, a couple decades or more. It starts to make your head explode. So another way to simplify this is Roth is tax insurance. Because unless Congress decides to kind of welch on the contract with America that is Roth, once you go ahead and pay your tax and put dollars into Roth, whether it's a contribution or a conversion, you're done paying tax on those dollars. And so it's insurance against future taxation of those dollars. And I do think that concept of Roth is tax insurance can be really helpful when you're trying to see through a cloudy crystal ball about tax rate now versus tax rate later.
One thing we also talked about before the call started was tax rates are historically low. You can look at the overall taxation rates. The U.S. government is still running massive deficits every year. So the current tax income for the government isn't covering our bills. And if you look internationally as well, like I live in New Zealand, the top tax bracket is 39%, and it starts at about $120,000 of income. And that's, for a lot of income earners, you hit that very quickly. You don't have to be too far in your career before you're making $120,000 equivalent in New Zealand. And now every single dollar that you earn going forward is taxed at 39%. But we see those effective tax rates on very high income earners already in New York City and California, where the state's taking their cut, the city's taking their cut. Before you know it, they're up to maybe a 50% effective tax rate for those high income earners. So all that tax talk to say that there is an argument to be made, like you said, for Roth with the tax insurance. But as you push into those higher brackets, you might say, look, I'm not exactly sure what the future holds, but perhaps I should not pay my taxes on my income today by contributing to my traditional account. And that opens up options because we just had this Roth in-plan conversion added to the TSP. So what can you do with this Roth in-plan conversion?
Yeah. So the big deal here is that until January 28th, which is when they roll this out of 2026, military members had to wait until either they reached 59 and a half or they separated from service, often from retirement, to be able to take advantage of low tax rates to move dollars from that pre-tax traditional pile to the Roth pile. And even more importantly, that combat zone tax exempt pile of money, you also had to wait to get those dollars full Roth treatment, because we kind of a lot of times think of those as like near Roth dollars, but they're really not until they're into a Roth account. So this is a really big deal because it's going to allow military members and veterans to take advantage of kind of full throttle authority on, I think I understand my tax rate arbitrage between now and retirement. And let me see if I can make the most of that by growing the Roth pile and either shrinking or right-sizing the traditional pile.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back to the show.
Hey, Spencer, I got a cousin that just graduated from high school, and they're about to start basic training in a few months. Any ideas on a gift I should get him?
Yep, sure do, Jamie. The Military Money Manual, A Practical Guide to Financial Freedom, is a concise, easy to read, and practical guide to your military money. It's the book that I wish someone had handed me on my first day in the military. In the book, I explain the exact money tactics and investing strategies that can enable you to achieve financial independence while serving in the U.S. military. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and my website. It's hardcover, paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. You can get a special discount using promo code podcast on my website, shop.militarymoneymanual.com.
So I think a lot of military families will have a mix of traditional and Roth, either because their plan changed, their investment philosophy changed, their income change with maybe a spouse coming in and out of work, or maybe they had a friend at work on a TDY that told them you should do traditional, and so they switched to traditional. So it gives you an option now where you can change it at certain points in your career with some caveats. So before we get into the specifics of in-plan conversions and when it might be right, what are some warnings that you would, or cautions that you would want people to consider before they start looking into this tool?
Yeah, the first, probably the most important one would be you really have to do some level of tax projection to understand what you're up against. Because Spencer, you highlighted the top of the tax bracket. So let's just say that you're trying to stay under the 22% bracket. If you're married filing joint, that's basically under 100, but that's under 100 of taxable income. And one of the things you have to factor into this is not only should you be concerned about taxable income, but you should be concerned about the phase outs of various deductions and credits. And most of those are based off of a version of modified AGI. Some people call that MAGI, but modified AGI. And there's lots of definitions of modified AGI depending on what the threshold is. And so at the lower income levels, you're probably good to go because most of those modified AGI thresholds are based on earning quite a bit. But, one of the ones that becomes an example would be, I guess, say like the lifetime learning credit or the American Opportunity Credit. Those phase out ranges are between $160,000 and $180,000. So if you're, say, in the 22% bracket, and you think you're fine staying in the 22% bracket, okay, except that you could actually lose access to one of those credits because you do a Roth conversion that affects those. And so that would be an example where you aren't just concerned about the tax bracket, but then also the various credits and phase outs. And so to the question of what's the most important thing to do, you really got to do some level of tax projection. Advisors have fancy software for this. There's a tool out there, I'm sure you guys have seen it, called Dinkytown. It's got all sorts of cool calculators. They've got an excellent, basically 1040 tax return simulator. You kind of got to know what you're doing to do it right, but you can DIY your way through this with some level of help. And of course, there's all the AI tools that can help you, but they hallucinate too. But yeah, I do think you have to start off with a really good tax projection because you want to be tracking not just the top of the tax rate or tax bracket, but then also those various phase outs and such.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing for people to understand is because the entire amount of your conversion is taxable. There's no growth and you're only taxed on the growth or anything.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're exactly right. And with the one caveat being that if you are converting pre-tax and you have some combat zone exempt dollars, it's a pro rata conversion. So if you have 10% combat zone and you convert 10,000, then only 9,000 is taxable. But most folks are not going to have such an enormous amount of combat zone exempt to where they shouldn't be focusing on the pre-tax portion.
So that amount that I convert is added to my taxable income, which could affect my benefits and which tax bracket I'm in. So would you recommend that people need to have some cash set aside if they're going to convert to cover the tax bill?
100%, because you cannot pay it out of the amount you convert. So kind of going back to, let's say you want to Roth convert 10,000 and let's say you're going to be in the 12% bracket. Well, that would be a $1,200 tax bill. In other worlds outside of TSP, you could, in theory, use the dollars. You probably don't want to, but you could. TSP, full stop, will not allow you to. So those dollars have got to come from somewhere else. And so that brings up two other topics here. One is, you got to have the dollars. A common place for a lot of military families, if they're over withholding and getting a refund anyway, is just sponge it up out of your refund. So if you do that tax projection and you also project what your withholdings are going to be, and you're like, oh, okay, it turns out I'm giving Uncle Sam a free loan. I'm going to get a refund. Well, let's just use those refund dollars, and that can pay for your Roth conversion. So that's actually one way to do it. And that's beneficial too, because your withholdings, since they are withheld throughout the year, they get preferential timing treatment from the IRS. And so if you're paying that tax bill out of your just normal W-2 withholdings, you shouldn't be faced with a risk of a late payment penalty. And if you are, it would be lesser. The other case would be, let's just say that you can't do it out of withholdings. You don't want to do it out of withholdings. And yes, you need some other source of funds, some money you're saving up on the side. And now there's a timing component because you need to make an estimated payment in the quarter that you do that conversion. So, basically estimated payment dates are April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and then January 15th. So whichever quarter you do that Roth conversion, you also need to determine how much estimated payment you need to make. A rough WAG is going to be your tax rate times that. But again, without an accurate tax projection, you could overshoot or undershoot.
Yeah, I think it's really important. If I would say, if this is going to be your first time doing this, it might be this is the time that you use a service like hellonectarine.com and have a conversation with a CFP or a CPA and just say, hey, can you just check my work here? This is not the time to just go rogue and convert $100,000 of your traditional TSP to your Roth TSP and just hope for the best.
You do not want to Leroy Jenkins this.
And finding a MFA advisor that gives advice only, you might be able to buy an hour or two of their time. There's lots of friends of the podcast like ALF and the MFAA network as well.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, because I was just thinking of let's say, and we can start talking about some examples here, but I did a 2-year deployment to the United Arab Emirates. And let's just say that I had gotten there in January and then left in not the December of the same year, but December of the next year. So that's 2 full years of CZTE, combat zone tax exclusion. If I had contributed to the max into my Roth account and also put another $25,000, let's say, for easy math, so $50,000 into my TSP, so 25 into the Roth and 25 into the traditional. And then the next year I was able to, let's say my balance was, sorry, I'm mixing the example here, but let's say my balance in the traditional was $100,000. And I wanted to move that whole $100,000 from my traditional to my Roth. And I look at the pay chart and I say, okay, that's 10%. Some of that's in the 10% bracket, some of it's in the 12% bracket. I can also take out the standard deduction as well. Now it's only $70,000 because I'm married filing jointly. But let's just say I look at the 12% bracket for next year runs up to $100,800. So I just say I'm just going to set aside $12,000 and I'm going to make an estimated payment. The IRS actually has really easy tools to make estimated payments. I've been making estimated payments now for a couple of years, just irs.gov. You can even make estimated payments by credit cards. So if you have a credit card that you're trying to meet the minimum spend on, you will have to pay a fee on that. It's about 2%, depending on which payment processor you use. I think they all charge the same fees now. There's 3 authorized credit card payment processors, but that's an easy way to meet a minimum spend. But factor in the fact that you're going to have to pay a fee on that transaction. You can also just make a bank transfer as well. Again, irs.gov, you can set up to do estimated payments on there. But let's say you move $100,000 over and you're like, okay, just, for easy math, I'm going to do $12,000. You make the estimated payment. When you go to file your taxes, maybe you get a little bit back, maybe you owe a little bit more. For most military families, though, you're going to fall into the safe harbor, which means that, let's say the previous year, you received a refund. That means that in the current year, when you do this giant traditional Roth conversion and you have this big spike in your taxable income, the IRS basically says, make your payments, but as long as you're within, for high income earners, that's for, I think it's AGI over $150,000 a year. They say, as long as you're within 110% of your previous year's tax bill. But for a lot of military families, you're receiving a refund anyways. So you're gonna fall into that safe harbor. Is that about right for the estimated payments?
Yeah, I would simplify it to say there's 3 ways to get to estimated payments. One is if your bill is within $1,000 of what you've paid, that's a shack. The IRS doesn't care. And then you pay the lesser of either 90% of your estimate of the current year or 100% if you're below 150, 110% if you're above 150 of the previous year. And this kind of goes again to, like you were saying earlier, when you get done with your tax return, don't just sign it on April 15th, do some homework of okay, what did I pay this year? Did TurboTax or whatever spit out those estimated payment coupons? Do I really need to send them in? What do I think this next year is going to look like? Because you don't want to be late to need on estimated payments. And then you also got to watch out for other lumpy events that are not that uncommon, like selling real estate properties. A lot of military families will sell a property maybe during PCS season. And if that's, a spike in income in the summertime, but they don't settle up with the tax man until the next April 15th, there's a good chance you're going to pay some extra pesos for that.
For sure. So as far as I can see, and I haven't been on to, I'm not in plan anymore because I'm separated. So maybe Jamie can chime in on this, but it's going to be pretty simple. You log into tsp.gov. There'll be an option to do an in-plan conversion, and you can do it. It says based on the information that the TSP has published, it says that you're going to be able to do this up to 26 times per year. So I'm sure there's going to be people out there who are on a tax-free deployment and they're going to be contributing to their traditional and then immediately converting to Roth. I would say this is kind of one of those things you could probably wait till like November, December and just kind of analyze the entire year and then make a decision. Another thing that people will get hung up on here is, do I have to do this while I'm actually in the combat zone? So let's say my deployment is January to June and I wait till August to do this. Is that okay? Like, is that going to affect anything?
Yeah, no, great question. Traditionally, there are two common times a year when you would do Roth conversions. And then there's some branches and sequels from that. So the most common would be in the end of the fourth quarter, because you have the best understanding of what your actual income is going to be for the year. There's things you can't know. Like you probably know whether or not you're going to sell a house. You hopefully know whether or not you're going to sell some taxable securities. You hopefully know whether or not your spouse is going to get a job and create a different income picture than you started the year with, or different than you end your deployment with. So I really would not tie it to deployment timing at all. I'd really tie it to when you can see enough over the horizon to know what your income is going to be at the end of the year. And there's other things that can cause this that you aren't thinking about, like your relative dies and leaves you an inherited IRA and the RMD hasn't been taken for the year. And now you have to take taxable income from that. Like those things happen. So you really want to give yourself the best chance to jink out of any late inbounds at the end of the year. Okay, so if time of year one is end of year, time of year two is when there's a big market downturn. So let's imagine that you have 100 shares of, let's just call it the C fund, and they're all pre-tax traditional. And let's just say for easy math that each one's worth $100. So that's $10,000. The tax bill on that in the 12% bracket would be $1,200. Okay, but now let's say that pick your favorite politician says a thing, that thing roils the markets, and all of a sudden your $10,000 C fund, and it's pre-tax, dips temporarily to $5,000, 50% market decline, like everyone thinks the world's on fire. Well, if you do a Roth conversion when the value is $10,000, then you're going to pay tax. I'm sorry, when the value is $5,000 after that big market roller coaster, you're going to pay tax on $5,000, which, again, at that 12% rate is going to be $600. You're going to pay 50% coupon on taxes, like blue light special taxes are on sale when the market goes down. And unless we don't think the market's going to recover, in which case, why are you in the market? Like go buy tulip bulbs or something. But, unless you don't think the market's going to recover, then when there's a market dip, it's at least worth betting that, okay, hey, this is going to work out well for me, because you're going to proportionally move a lot more shares. If you were willing to pay tax on $10,000, well, $10,000 moves twice as many shares when the market's on sale. So time one, end of the year, time two, at a big market dip. If you have that mindset, then what you might do is, if you're really looking over the horizon at this stuff, is you probably want to start your year with a squishy Roth conversion budget to say, if the market doesn't do anything squirrely and I don't have any unforeseen income events, then I think I can Roth convert about, whatever the number is, let's say $20,000 this year, and stay inside of any thresholds that I'm looking to stay inside of. And then if there's a big market dip, okay, cool. Reevaluate real quick and see if you want to do that amount. Maybe you do part of that amount. If the market goes down in March, there's no reason why it can't keep going down. So you might use part of your Roth conversion budget at the first market dip, and then you might consider doing some more later. So those are some other ways that you could think about it. One other thought about this would be, let's just say that we're not talking about our younger service members still active, or younger retirees. We're talking about older retirees that just want to leave their money in the TSP, but now take advantage of this. They're also probably thinking about a Roth conversion budget. They probably want to use the whole end of year or a market dip, but they might also kind of dollar cost average and just do it, say, quarterly or monthly. And that's where that ability to do it 26 times a year in the TSP is novel. I think I'd really caution against doing that because A, it's a lot of work if you're doing it right, and B, it's probably unnecessary work as well. But I'm kind of glad that they did that just because, if someone is going to be deployed the whole year, they're single income, they have really good visibility. Yeah, get those dollars into Roth as fast as possible so that their earnings are Roth. Because that's definitely the benefit of going early, is that all future earnings are now Roth as opposed to essentially converting what is principal and earnings.
The idea of converting when the market's down isn't quite intuitive to me, because it's like, I understand, especially in like the TSP, like there are shares there, right? But the way that they're the way that's displayed is just a dollar value. But yeah, I mean, that's what you're doing, right? Is if you're moving $5,000 from your traditional to your Roth, and 2 months ago those shares were worth twice as much or 30% more, then yeah, that makes sense. You're just moving shares from one account to another, even though the value of those shares has gone down and the value of the account's gone down. So that's an interesting opportunity there. If we do have, I think we will at some point in the near future, have the market will hiccup. Just in 2025, we saw a nearly 20% drop in the S&P 500. So, and
Yeah.
a lot of people have forgotten that already in January 2026.
The American voter / taxpayer doesn't historically have a really long memory. But yeah, and then there's one other topic I want to throw out here, and I would call this probably the 401 level of Roth conversions, but it's a good discussion to have. If our primary focus here is junior service members kind of betting on the come that they'll have a lower or a higher tax rate later, yeah, Roth is tax insurance. When I talk to clients that are getting closer to retirement or in retirement, there's a lens you could look through. Should I do Roth conversions? And I like to call it 2, 1, or 0. And this is the idea of, am I optimizing my tax bill for 2 spouses married filing jointly with a similar life expectancy? In which case that might argue for, hey, yeah, if we do Roth, if the math says that Roth conversions lower our lifetime tax bill, then green light, go, we ought to do that. If the math says no, it doesn't really change things, then we don't do it. But if we really want to focusing on prioritizing 2 spouses, married filing joint, similar lifespans, that's one way to look at it. The one would be, let's just say that we have 2 spouses, maybe different ages. The man is historically going to die sooner, and he's a bunch older than the surviving female spouse, probably lives a lot longer. But if she has a similar level of income, her tax rates are far more punishing at the single tax rate schedule. And therefore, you might want to do Roth conversions to optimize for a single spouse with a longer lifespan facing higher tax rates because of the essentially, widower penalty from the tax code. So that's the 2 and the 1. And then the 0 would be, okay, you know what? We're not spending all this money. There's going to be some left over for our heirs. Do we want to prepay the tax bill and leave our kids or whoever our heirs are? Do we want to leave them Roth money that they don't have to pay tax on? Or do we want to leave them pre-tax money that they do have to pay tax on? And you might also, the graduate level of this would be when families start to talk about, I'm the retiree and maybe I'm in the 22 or 24% bracket, but my kids are doing great and they are trapped in the high block at 35 plus for the rest of their lives. Maybe what they want to do is gift me the tax to do Roth conversions, and let's do Roth conversions at whatever rate is lower than theirs, and they're going to inherit Roth money, but the tax bill on that was paid at 24% instead of 35. There's a generational component. Again, our junior folks don't care about this, but eventually their future self might. If they're listening to this podcast and they're money nerds, they might paint themselves into that too much money corner. So anyway, 2, 1, or 0 thinking can be helpful as well.
I hope everybody listening to this podcast gets to that situation where their children have to start gifting them up to the gift limit so that they can do some Roth conversions, because the children are just crushing it and mom and dad are saying, hey, look, we're down here in the 12% or 22% bracket. Why don't we move some money around here and you can pay for our Roth conversion so that you're going to inherit this money hopefully later rather than sooner. And you're not going to have to pay the tax man on it because, and then on the flip side, right, if the kids are in a nonprofit or teaching or something, or maybe that they themselves have joined the military and they're going to be in lower brackets, for the foreseeable future. Maybe they just say, mom and dad just hang on. The kids will inherit traditional money. But I've got a couple of friends who have inherited traditional IRAs, and if they're doing well, it's painful. Like paying those tax bills is painful. And the crazy thing is depending on the size of the account, they might be they've got 10 years to clear it out, but the account keeps growing. And so even though they're trying to stay out of the 24% bracket, they keep getting kicked into it because they got to take money out of this thing, and they got to do it. They got to do it sooner rather than later, because if they don't, then they're going to have a massive tax bill at the end of the 10-year withdrawal period.
Yeah, and so from that perspective, like that Roth insurance concept is maybe even generational Roth insurance or tax insurance.
I love that concept. And I'm always been biased a little more towards Roth, and we've talked about that on past episodes. I think I really like the way of conveying that, as well as the 210 model that you presented there. So thanks for that, Alf.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back to the show.
It's no secret Spencer and I are both huge fans of the Thrift Saving Plan, the military's version of the 401k retirement plan. We've both been investing in the TSP for over 14 years and are thrilled to announce we've consolidated all the information you need to know into a new course called the Confident TSP Investing Course.
That's right. The course is a comprehensive guide to navigating the TSP, breaking it down to easy, bite-sized chunks that lay out the basics of the thrift savings plan, the funds available, and the investing strategies so you can build wealth while you serve.
We both know what it's like to be a beginner and to be overwhelmed with all the information that's out there about investing in the TSP. Head over to militarymoneymanual.com/TSP, Tango Sierra Papa, to find our simple breakdown of all you need to know. You get lifetime access, and we'll have a growing library of content. And one of my favorite parts about the course is that for every course we sell, we're going to be donating one to an E4 or below.
Yeah, I love that feature of the course, Jamie. So if you're an officer, an NCO, a senior NCO out there, and you purchase a course, first of all, thank you. And also know that you're helping a fellow service member, a sailor, a soldier, a Marine, an airman, a guardian, a Coast Guardsman, E4 or below, take one step closer to their financial success.
The link's in the show notes, or head over to militarymoneymanual.com/TSP, where you can sign up for the Confident TSP Investing course. Now, back to the show. Hey, one of the questions I had that I didn't know until we had all of our websites and documents up, this is available to people even after they've retired or separated as well. I thought it was just for active participants, but it looks like, based on what I've learned from you, that's not true.
Yeah, the only class of people that shouldn't be able to do this is non-spouse beneficiaries. So let's say I die and I don't have a spouse and I leave it to my kids. They can't do it. But to be honest, a non-spouse beneficiary shouldn't have a TSP account for very long. They should get that thing into an IRA. The inheritance rules get really, really gnarly there. So I fully intend to ops check this thereabouts of January 28th as a retired geezer myself.
Well, yeah, if you end up doing a step-by-step guide or anything, let us know. We'll go back and include it in the show notes. The other reason I asked that question is because there's a lot of restrictions on 5-year rules for the contributions and withdrawals. And my initial thought was, well, I don't care about that. I'm way more than 5 years from being able to touch this money. But some of our listeners, if they're closer to retirement or older, that may be an impact. Is there anything on the 5-year rules or restrictions you want to share for those who have maybe closer to retirement age?
The TSP website, I thought, actually did a good job of laying this out, that there's 3 different 5-year rules. 2 of them apply here. The first one is essentially what makes the earnings non-taxable on Roth. Because if we're used to thinking Roth, we usually think like, put the money in and I never pay tax again. And that's usually true if you don't touch the money until age 59 and a half, because you're so many years past the 5-year rule. But essentially that 5-year rule, which is really about a 4-year rule, is that you have to put the money in, or after the first Roth contribution or conversion, you have to wait at least 5 years, but it's really 5 years from January 1st of the first of those 5 years. So it could actually be like 4 years and a day, and you have to be 59 and a half. So if you are in that kind of mid to late 50s retiree type, and you're doing this, now you actually have to get to 59 and a half. But that actually gets you to the second 5-year rule, which is each conversion is its own tranche, and that each conversion has its own 5-year rule. And really what this is about is, when you think about, if you do the Roth conversion inside a TSP, and this would be true of a 401k as well, and you roll it over to an IRA, well, in an IRA, we can pull contributions out before age 59 and a half. But to avoid the situation where people basically just Roth convert pre-tax money and then pull it right back out before age 59 and a half, and therefore like there was no treating this as retirement money. The IRS said, nope, 5-year tranche on each conversions. Once you get to age 59 and a half, that goes away. So in some ways, that 5-year rule is a bit of a restriction without meaning for younger people, because they're going to do this conversion and then they're going to leave it in there till 59 and a half. If they're in the FIRE crowd and they're going to, do the whole 72T and other, early distributions, different, more complicated discussion. But for most people, Roth early, Roth often, and then you probably won't have to worry about the 5-year rules.
I think that's important, because if you mess that up, the 5-year rule or withdrawing before 59 and a half, not only will you owe taxes, but you also owe the 10% penalty. So we want to make sure that people understand all the limitations there before they just, it's Roth dollars, I can pull it out now.
Just to complicate things further, I just also want to mention that if you do have the opportunity, let's say you're in a combat zone for a good chunk of the year or an entire year, and your taxable income goes way down. One thing that I did as well was I had traditional IRA money, and I was able to convert that to my Roth IRA and pay the taxes on it, but at a very low tax rate. I think I didn't get out of the 10% bracket. Maybe it was the 12% bracket that year. And then what that enabled me to do is, as my income kept increasing, because I cleared out the traditional IRA, I opened up a very simple backdoor Roth IRA option for myself and my wife, where we didn't have to worry about the pro rata rule because we had traditional IRA money locked up. So I just want to throw that out as well. That's a question that we get sometimes for people, high speed, high income earners in the military that are on deployments. I've talked to a couple military docs, military pilots, and that's a question that comes up about unlocking their backdoor Roth IRA options. So I think taxes can be very intimidating for people, but if you take the time, especially, and we were talking about the AI programs earlier and how they do have a tendency to hallucinate, and they're not always completely up to speed on all the latest changes. Like for a while there, if you talk to Gemini or Claude, they weren't familiar with Big Beautiful Bill Act that came out earlier in 2025. But they are sometimes good. You got to fact check them, but they are sometimes good for modeling and for thinking through some of these more complex issues. I'm pretty sure that pretty soon TurboTax, right, will have a pretty well-vetted generative AI program that you can kind of chat through and think through things. But there's the Military Financial Advisors Association, MFAA, which ALF is a part of. Highly recommend that. We'll have that in the show notes. You can go check that out. You can check out ALF at Winged Wealth. He also has a great Facebook group. Do you want to plug that, Alf, real quick?
Yeah, it's just called Fighter Pilot Finance. And there's a couple gatekeeper questions, but reach out to me if you'd like to join and you don't know the gatekeeper questions. Happy to have you join. I blog pretty prolifically too. So if you go to my website at wingedwealth.com, there's my blogs on there. And I think the one on this topic that I wrote earlier last year is still pretty evergreen. There's one or two things I think have now been clarified, but there's a checklist on there for kind of how to think through this. That is what we've talked about today.
I'm sure we're going to get tons of questions this year about it. So we'll put out some more content about it. I'm going to have a post up on militarymoneymanual.com soon. And we'll probably have, JB, it's probably a topic that we can reattack later in the year as we kind of figure out how it's all being executed on, actually implemented on tsp.gov, and maybe do a video walkthrough of actually converting some money. I just checked my account. I'm about 50. Interestingly, even though I didn't think I made a lot of traditional contributions, I'm about 50% traditional, 50% Roth in my TSP. So there is some opportunity there. Just do a test case.
You got to remember, the TSP didn't allow Roth until 2012. So geezers like me that got into the TSP right when it started still have the vast majority of their money in their traditional, even though you switched to Roth as soon as it was allowed in 2012, just because those dollars have had more time to compound. You got more shares of them and everything. So
yeah, compounding interest.
Yeah, and then of course, all the newer folks today, all their employer match BRS dollars are going to be pre-tax. So that's, I think, where there could be that compelling argument for, hey, I could do this frequently throughout the year to minimize growth on pre-tax dollars. So I do think that that's a pretty cool feature. There's a couple other quick hit and runs that I think would be worth getting out there. Do you mind if I speed date those real quick?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Roth conversions are irreversible. Didn't used to be the case. You don't find too many websites anymore that talk about them being reversible. they are irreversible. So you got to measure several times before cutting. If you overshoot and you busted a tax threshold you didn't want to bust, sorry, you're going to pay that tax. The second one is this is going to generate a 1099-R tax form, which is the type of tax form that you get for any sort of movement of money out of a retirement account, even if it goes into another retirement account. So essentially, you're going to move dollars from your pre-tax retirement account or pre-tax TSP to your Roth TSP. Boom, that's a 1099-R. You should probably only just get one for the year, even if you do this 26 times or whatever the number is. But you'll get that for any of those distributions. And if you aren't used to handling 1099-Rs, and you self-file, might be one more reason to phone a friend on how you do the tax prep on this, because 1099-Rs have lots and lots of codes typically, and those codes can, depending on how they're entered and handled, and sometimes they need to be worked around, can result in the risk of double taxation. That might be a little bit more common in some other 1099-R scenarios, but if you're not used to handling 1099-Rs, it's not quite fire and forget. Let's see. The TSP is going to make a $500 minimum. So if you do want to do a test drive on this, you're going to do it with at least $500 conversions. That probably shouldn't be too big of a deal, but keep that in mind. There's also some really weird rules about you need to leave at least $500 behind in each type of account, combat zone, tax exempt, and pre-tax. Those are kind of wonky rules. I would imagine for most people with pretty sizable balances, it's not a factor, but I could see where someone who is just getting into the service, doesn't have a lot in their TSP, and is wanting to really max perform this tool, they could run into those leave behind things. So there's that. For the other silverbacks in the crowd, if you are of RMD age, then the first dollars out are RMD dollars, and then that's required minimum distribution. And then the last dollars or the second dollars can be Roth conversions, but you can't do Roth conversions first. And that's unfortunate, but true. I'm sure there's some other things out there, but I think that the big takeaway is measure lots of times before cutting, because if you were trying to avoid a tax trigger, whether it's the top of a tax bracket or one of the various phase outs for a deduction or credit, there's several different math equations you got to do to make sure you get it right. Otherwise, you're going to pay more tax than you expected.
Yeah, all good advice there. I think that this is one of those, kind of powerful tools that's available. Some people are going to make some mistakes. We're going to get some questions about, hey, is this reversible? Like Alf said, no, unfortunately, it's not in this case. So definitely a measure twice, cut once kind of thing. And the other people I wanted to give a shout out to is the militarytaxexperts.org. That's Military Tax Experts Alliance. And you can check out people who are very familiar with military situations. You won't have to explain what a PCS or a TDY or a
CCTE.
CCTE. You won't have to explain that you have untaxed allowances, state of legal residence. Those are things that are just going to be assumed. So check them out if you have complicated tax questions. And if you're in the fortunate position where you have traditional TSP balance, which a lot of people in the blended retirement system, the BRS, are going to have because you're automatically throwing 5% into there. And you are in a position where you have an opportunity to convert some of that to Roth and lock in at your currently low tax rates. This is a great opportunity. Highly recommend you look into it, and it could save you potentially, depending on how the stock market performs, how your portfolio performs the next couple decades. This could be a $10,000, possibly even $100,000 lifetime tax savings. So lots of opportunity here.
Probably seven figures. Yeah. For a lot of people, they're making a 7-figure difference the earlier you do Roth conversions, especially if you truly are going to be in that higher tax bracket later. Spencer, one other plug here too, just because some listeners may work with a financial advisor.
Mm-hmm.
If your financial advisor doesn't do tax projections for you at some reasonable level of fidelity, you should be requesting that service and or shopping. I would argue that if someone calls themselves a financial advisor and they don't do tax projections, like that person is your general practitioner in a doctor mindset. They know the most about all of your financial pieces and parts. Your tax preparer, if you have one, only gets a snapshot at the end of the year. They don't know all the things going on in your life. If there's a financial professional in your world that should have the responsibility for doing reasonably detailed tax projections, it ought to be your financial advisor. If they don't do that, it's possible that they missed the memo that that's what we're supposed to be doing these days, because there really isn't someone else in your financial life, more likely than not, that has the wherewithal to do that, that should know your personal life, know your finances, know what's coming down the pike. Just put that plug out there, because I do talk to a lot of folks who are coming from some of the big broker-dealer type firms that just don't do that type of thing, and they don't realize what they're missing. You may want to check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of things that move the needle for high income earners, it's taxes. For high net worth, high income earners, I mean, sometimes the biggest expense, bigger than housing, bigger than transportation, bigger than groceries, bigger than travel, bigger than discretionary is taxes for a lot of these people. Whatever you can do to move the needle on your biggest category, that's going to just overall increase your options, your quality of life, just give you more pesos to play with and to enjoy life with and to do the things that you want to do. That's what it's all about, right?
Hey, Alf, as we wrap up, I know we've had you on the podcast a couple of times. Your firm has grown over the last couple of years since you retired personally. Any update you want to give on your firm? Are you accepting new clients? Do you do one-time advice-only visits or only long-term relationships these days? What's the status?
I am on a wait list. Good problem to have. I wish I didn't. I've hired some new team members and I'm trying to grow capacity as fast as I can. I do most of my work with ongoing relationships. As a do-it-yourselfer, I get why most folks would be allergic to that. I do flat fee pricing, which I think is a better model for that.
I love that.
Yeah, I also do one-time plans. I get why you would want that too. I don't do as many of those because they frankly take a seat on the bus. And so it's not necessarily my best business decision, but I also like to help as many people as I can. And then I also do hourly consulting. And that works really well for very discreet, hey, could I get a second opinion on my portfolio? Or would you walk through my tax return with me? It's not great for like comprehensive financial planning just because that involves a lot of hours. But, as you guys mentioned, MFAA, I think we've got either 26 or 28 advisors now.
Wow.
And so there's a varying price range, but just an amazing crop of people. And their hearts are all in the right direction there. They're all fee-only. They're all fiduciary, full stop. The only thing they sell is advice and support. They don't sell any insurance or products or annuities or anything like that. If you're going to pay someone $1 for financial advice, like that's the least conflicted way to do it. And I'll put out the other plug of I am trying to grow my team. I can only grow it so fast because I'm the training department too. But I spend a lot of time in mentorship calls with people looking to enter the career field. And so if you're serious about it and want to have a chat, I'm happy to have a discussion just to help try to bring more people in because the need is insatiable. I have way more people knocking on my door than I'm ever going to be able to serve. And so we need more people with the right heart, the right education, the right experience doing this type of work.
Well, Alf, thanks again so much for joining us on the podcast. People can find you at Winged Wealth and your Facebook, Fighter Pilot Finance. And you're also on LinkedIn too. I think you're probably one of the reasons I haven't completely deleted my LinkedIn account yet because I like getting the updates there. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see what we can do about getting a T-shirt or a patch out to our most frequent guests. But
I need a velvet jacket. Like you guys really think over the velvet jackets.
We do need to look at investing in some velvet jackets for the firm, definitely. But the Roth plan conversions, huge opportunity, I think, for the right person. This isn't going to apply to, I don't know, maybe 80% of military service members, but there's 1 million active duty troops out there. So there's definitely opportunity for a couple 100,000 people probably to take advantage of this. Understanding it is the first step.
Well, and lots more on the civilian side and the retiree veteran side. So
that's right.
lots of folks out there. So
that's right.
Yeah, very much appreciate the opportunity. Love what you guys do. Again, you guys have your hearts in the right place. So as soon as you want jobs as financial advisors, you just let me know.
All right. Yeah. We'll chat after the call. Thanks.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.